Okay. Sorry. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. No, this is not my I've fallen and can't get up. What we're doing is we're working with our Swivl. I'm still kind of learning and playing with that a little bit. And what this does, wherever I walk, it'll follow me around. No, I went too far. Too quick. Come on, buddy. There you go. And then it'll follow me in the class, and it'll record what I'm saying, too. So if you're interested in using something like this in a class you have in one of your courses, it could be a helpful tool, or having students as well if they're doing presentations, that kind of thing. Today, what we're going to talk about is looking at plagiarism, but kind of looking at actually underlying themes of what may motivate a student with plagiarism. And there's really going to be two main topics we're going to talk about. One is student motivation, and then student choice, and how that plays into plagiarism in influencing a student to do that or not influencing a student to do that. So essentially those are our two main things that we want to discuss today. And then hopefully you had a chance to talk a little bit about those questions. We'll give you a chance to maybe discuss a little bit more later on as well. So one of the questions we asked was, what does student motivation have to do with plagiarism? And I'd like you to kind of share out some of your thoughts maybe that you discussed at your table. What do you think motivation has to do with that? And I'm good at wait time, too, so it's okay. Pam?
Generally, if students are unmotivated or don't understand something, they're more likely to look for other avenues of resources, if you will.
Possibly the easy way out?
How much they care about the subject.
Yes. Absolutely.
Depended on what their motivation is. If they're motivated to get good grades, I think you're going to get a higher level of plagiarism. If they're motivated to learn something, you're going to get a lower level plagiarism.
So the student's personal goals can play into that. What they have with that. Yeah,
or even
absolutely.
Societal goals.
Sure.
When we base whether a student gets to keep their financial aid package on their grades, then they are motivated to get good grades.
Chasing the almighty A. Yeah, that's a good point. Others?
Or maybe even what their perception is of what you want.
Probably if students feel like I can do what's being asked of me, or I understand what's being asked of me and I can do it, I think that they'll, for the most part, they'll do it. If they don't understand it, they feel like it's insurmountable, I think that contributes to the attitude of working on like this.
Do you see their past experiences past successes or failures for students playing into motivation in a course that you teach? How does that affect it in a sense?
Kinds of students. So you have the students who, because of motivation, the plagiarism might occur, but there's a teachable moment and an opportunity to be able to work with that student, and they make a conscious decision to modify that behavior. And then you've got other students who, quite frankly, just don't care. It's not important to them, and maybe time is the factor, motivation, and they're just not willing to make that adjustment. So it depends how we deal with plagiarism, I guess, as well in the classroom, as faculty.
I find with my adult students, I've spent a lot of time explaining plagiarism because they're really, I found they're not motivated necessarily to plagiarize, but they lived in a culture where plagiarism happens everywhere in what they're doing. So they think if they just reword a bunch of stuff that it's not plagiarism. And so trying to help them understand it's not just quoting specific, but it's thoughts, it's ideas, it's the whole thing. Because they live in a culture, most of them, where they take, in a business, they take from everything that comes across it and they just send it in.
How has the internet affected that, do you think? Right? Changed everything in a lot of ways.
So you don't just have to check the final product, you have to check all the steps leading up to the final product. I mean, it seems like with our doctoral students, if you don't check their annotated bibliographies, you don't check that. If they've copied and pasted way back here, by the time they get to this point, they don't remember what they copied and pasted. Right. And so it's all a mess. So you have to check them all along the way.
Interesting. What I'd like to share with you is some synthesis, basically, that Robert Marzano and Deborah Pickering did several years ago. They looked at numerous studies on student motivation, and they put all those together, and they came up with basically a framework for themselves that really dealt with kind of 4 questions, in a sense. And this is coming from the student point of view of how do I feel as a student? Am I interested in the subject that I'm learning? Is this important to me as a student? And can I accomplish this as a student? And so we're going to briefly kind of look at each of those. And so hopefully as we go through this, some of it will be maybe some affirmation of, yeah, this makes sense, or brings up some kind of interesting points or questions to you. So the first one talks about how do I feel? And one of the things it mentions is the professors or the teachers' positive demeanor in the classroom is really important for students. And I think that goes back to a basic kind of human element. Do I feel welcomed into that? I think we've all maybe been in courses where, I know I have as a student, where I just felt like I was a number. At least when I was at undergrad over at Boise State, that's exactly what it was, because there was 300 in the room. So that plays an important part of it. Another one is interesting, the professor's enthusiasm versus intensity. And so one thing they mentioned was enthusiasm was really important, but differentiate that from intensity, which is really taking time to let your students know that this topic is important. What I'm about to teach you next, or what you're about to learn next, or this assignment that you're about to get is critical for your knowledge. And they said weighing out the differences really helped motivate students in their learning. The last one is student perception of acceptance, and it kind of ties into this as well. Going back, does the student feel like a number, or does my professor actually know me, care about me, and know other sides of me outside of the classroom that I'm in? Am I interested? They mentioned activities that promote competition help increase motivation within a classroom or a course. So it doesn't have to be anything that is extremely competitive, but if you can add anything that will add a contest between fellows or groups of students, it tend to bring up interest levels. Activities that promote friendly controversy. So trying to get students to be on different sides of a topic, or to take a certain side of a topic and be able to defend it, and then have another group take another side and be able to defend that as well. Activities that present unusual information. I think this is probably one of the classic ones that happens in the sciences. They said, well, students would become very interested with a type of experiment that may show information in a different way, or learning in a different way that will capture a student. If it blows up, if it bubbles. Absolutely. This doesn't last long, they mentioned. So it's not a technique to, I think, use consistently often, but to grab someone's attention for maybe one of those intensity moments where you really want to say this is critical content, it can be very helpful with that. Is it important to me? We kind of mentioned this a little bit. We're talking about goals, society goals. How does that play into a student? A student's personal goals have an effect on whether something is important to them. The personal choice. We are going to talk a little bit about choice in just a minute. I'll let Amy talk about that. But when students have an option or a choice in not only what they're learning, but how they might be able to display what they are learning, it can increase the importance to them. And then cognitively complex tasks. It's kind of one of the reasons we put one of those questions on there between regurgitation, which Jesse said that's the first time he's ever seen regurgitation on a paper while he's eating. So hopefully that didn't lead to anything, but regurgitating knowledge versus trying to get the brain to think at deeper levels. Students were much more, felt their topics were much more important when they had that. And then the last one is, am I interested in what I'm learning? A lot of that went back, and we kind of talked about this with student past experiences a little bit. So the student mindset. This goes with Carol Dweck's research. I think she's out of Columbia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. I think well, if you were last time I shared with me, a high school student, mathematics, I had a fixed mindset. I just really felt like God did not give me an ability to learn mathematics. And no matter what I did, I just couldn't learn it. So eventually I just decided to kind of get out of it. When in reality, it was simply because I was lazy. And I just didn't put the work in. And now I realize as an adult, had I put the effort, or if I put the effort in something, I tend to see growth in that. And so students who either have a growth or fixed or can understand that can make a big difference whether they're interested in a topic. Students' past experiences play a huge role in that as well. We're going to talk about choice in a moment, but if I have had failure in a course before or in a certain type of assignment, let's say the classic term paper, and I've had difficulty with that, then when I have a term paper again, the chances of me being interested in that are going to be down, and which could lead to me, maybe I'm going to go on the internet and find an easier source. And then the last one is student choice. Again, we mentioned that, but being able to compensate one of their areas of strength. So maybe the term paper isn't necessarily, like language is just one area where I don't feel like I have the strength, but I have it in the verbal skills, or I have it in the physical ability, or I have it in the ability to manipulate something with my hands, hands out. So students who can be able to show their knowledge in a skill that they feel is one of their strengths can help a student feel interested in that. So all of those in the framework kind of play in together for student motivation. And so hopefully some of those are things like, yes, that sounds something like I do in my course or in my classes, or hopefully it gets you to think a little bit about maybe I want to look or retweak something to hit some of those a little bit more. I'm going to turn it over to Amy. We're going to talk a little bit more about regurgitation and application.
Which one?
It's that one.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. You got to take this. Now if you fall.
I know, I gotta get it over my hair. He doesn't have big hair like I do. All right, here we go. Okay, so we posed a question. Regurgitation of information versus application of information. Who had something to say about that, of knowledge? Regurgitation of knowledge versus application of knowledge. Somebody have a differentiation to make?
Our table talked about how that's a skill that we don't think is often taught, and that depending on the level, I mean, even graduate and doctoral, but that's something that we need to be intentional and not assume students know how to do it and the steps that are involved and what our expectation might be.
I think when you're just asking students to kind of repeat what they've read or repeat what they've seen, sometimes unknowingly they plagiarize because they don't understand. It's easy after you've read so many things in somebody else's words and you start thinking in somebody else's words, and then somebody asks you to tell you what you learned, and you say it in somebody else's words because you've seen so much of it and you don't understand, well, this is not my idea anymore, it's someone else's idea, and I need to give, proper, appropriate attribution to that person. But I think sometimes they're not necessarily intentionally trying to plagiarize. They're just uneducated about like what he said. What is plagiarizing, and am I plagiarizing at this point because you're just asking me to repeat something that I've read? Well, I can do that, and I understand it because I know how to use it in my life.
Well, and that happened. I was writing a paper this summer, and I opened up my beginning statement and said, integration of technology is a hot topic in education. Integration of technology in education is a hot topic across the country. And she wrote cite, and I went, why do I have to cite that? It's a normal, I know that, but yes, but you read articles on it, you need to go back, and I was like, So, yes, so I took it out. Thank you, Greg, for divulging my secret. So I took it out, wasn't going to mess with it, and it worked. So, but regurgitation, the reason we put this in here is we want to challenge the norm. We want to challenge knowing about a topic versus asking our students to apply the topic, adding importance to the topic by saying, okay, now we know this. How do we apply apply that to either a real world problem, or how do we apply that knowledge to this situation or that situation? Because if we take knowledge and we're asking our students to apply that knowledge, that is harder to find that on the internet or in a book or a textbook. So what we're posing to you is a little bit of this. So does assignment course design increase or decrease the likelihood of plagiarism in assigned coursework? So does the way we design an assignment or a course have an effect on the likelihood of plagiarism? Did anybody get to that question? Does anybody have thoughts on that question? Eric?
I think one of the things that you said was, in addition to how you design the assignment, which I think affects the ability of somebody to find that material, is that if you use the same assignment in your class over and over and over again, it's developing the pool of students who have answered that question, who others can fall back to. So it's not only just a matter of developing the assignment, but is this changed often enough that we're not having students learning and plagiarizing from other students who've taken the class?
I go back to what Lori said, though. I think she's right that we need to be intentional about and learn how to help students know how to do that application process. What I see on my end of things, I see the assignment that they're struggling with, and they're struggling to find resources that'll do exactly this. And I have to help them with that thought process here in the library and say to them, okay, this is your scenario. This is the question you're trying to answer. You're not going to find an article that says, when you're in the hospital with a Native American, this is what you do. You're going to have to find this and this and this, and you're going to have to extrapolate and use that as your background to build on and step out and say, okay, because of all this, then this is probably how I would respond. They're scared to do that. They feel like they're not qualified. And I don't know how, there's a lot of questions in that comment.
Well, I think some of it goes back to that being okay with my professor to take that risk. Being okay with them knowing me enough that I can go to them and say, this is what I'm thinking, based on what I have.
I think sometimes
Being okay to fail.
that process is hard, they're doing something wrong. It should be easy. If it's not
It should be right
easy,
there.
then either the library databases are screwed up,
Or there's a right and wrong answer.
yeah, exactly.
And go ahead.
I think that we shouldn't just completely discount regurgitation.
Oh no, there is a place for recall.
I think we have to communicate with students. Sometimes the reason why they don't think learning something verbatim is important is no one's said that later we're going to apply this, or you're going to apply this. So before we get there, you have to know something. You have to have some base knowledge. I have to understand what a certain medication is going to do before I give it to a patient, right? And then you have base knowledge, but it's important. And then we're going to get to the important thing if you just be patient with it. Also say, now I'm going to give you a question that there's no clear right and wrong answer. You have to talk through this and apply. But we don't always communicate what our outcomes are that we want our students to do.
It takes a certain amount of personal maturity and I think of it as centeredness to do that as well. You said, or someone said, don't trust themselves enough to do it in the learning environment, and if it's a safe place to fail, really come into that. But I feel like some of my students they're just grasping at the things we've talked about in class or what they've read, rather than taking a minute to say, so what do I think about this, and how does it look for me based on those things? And that takes an element of maturity that, and I don't want to give them an out, but some of our students aren't there yet. Perhaps undergrad, I'm thinking of in particular.
And I would also, coming from a different perspective, the group of students, especially undergrad, that you are servicing right now, did not come from an environment where they were asked to do that. They came from an A, B, C, right and wrong world where their opinion was not asked on standardized tests and stuff like that. It's just now shifting over to where you're going to be receiving students who are being asked to state an opinion or what was the process of in synthesizing. Those are the students you are going to be getting in the next upcoming years. But that's why they are struggling with that, is because that is not the environment of school they came from.
I think part of that, though, is kind of our responsibility as faculty and administrators to communicate what the expectation is. Because I'm a very type A type of a person. I want to know exactly what the expectation is, and I love teachers who give me rubrics because then, and that's part of what we talk about, is I know exactly what they're expecting of me. But when I get a nebulous, oh, do this assignment and write this paper, and they don't give me any guidelines or anything, my blood pressure immediately goes up. I mean, it's just like, well, but I don't understand, what am I going to get graded on? And how am I going to, meet this invisible bar that I know is somewhere, but I can't see it? It drives me insane. And I think that a lot of students are the same way, so when the expectation is clearly communicated, look, there's not a right or wrong answer. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to synthesize, apply, relate back to what we've learned.
Yep.
As a student, I can conceptualize that. Even if I'm not very good at it yet, I can conceptualize that and understand, okay, this is what you're looking for. But if I don't know what you're looking for, I think it puts students in a bad position because they feel like, well, I'm just, shooting in the dark and I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do.
And I'm a very abstract, random personality outside of the classroom. But inside the classroom, it drives me just as nuts as a student to not know the expectations. So I think that goes for all personalities for the most part. But please, like Eric said, please don't say, there is a place for recall, there is a place for understanding, because we know with Bloom's taxonomy and, depths of knowledge that if you don't have those lower levels, you can't do the analyzing, you can't do the upper level processing. So you do need that. We're just saying if you can design, once they have that knowledge base, design your projects or your papers or your course design in a way where they are applying that knowledge, we would like to challenge the fact that maybe we can decrease plagiarism by just the way we design our lessons.
I thought the comment on is this easy for me or difficult for me was interesting as well. It kind of plays into that mindset where students don't understand academic struggle. They either think
Grit.
it's gifted, it's easy for me, or if it's difficult, then I can't do it. So communicating that is important, just as much as communicating the expectation of the assignment or the course, communicating that this will be academic struggle for you. I think that's important that students have that. If not, then also that mindset does shoot in, and what happens with motivation?
Yep. There's a great TED Talk on grit, and grit needing to be taught to students.
What's that?
Grit.
But what does that stand for? Does that stand for?
No, just
Oh, it's not an acronym.
no.
It's just, okay.
Just nothing fancy.
I don't know what it is, so tell me.
Just grit.
Gifted.
We could. There's our thing right there.
It's also a breakfast food.
It is.
I'm thinking of true grit.
Oh, research. Yes, go ahead.
So I do think that I would have to agree. I've got a lot of sophomores, and bulk of my teaching is with sophomores, undergrad sophomores, and they really don't have a lot of the maturity to go and pick up the kind of things that we want them to do, or they've got. I'm sure that someplace in their sophomore year or in their freshman year that somebody gave them something to go and help them to figure out that these courses were going to be more difficult in their sophomore year, and we weren't going to just regurgitate everything that we did. That's not the impression I have in the students. The students are, well, you have to tell me what I need to know, and then I'll be fine.
So I have an answer for that. I've taught undergrad nursing students for years. And they typically come and say, this is going to be on the test. And they've got a textbook that's this fat, and that's just one of them. And so I'd say, well, let's see, what would that look like at the patient's bedside? The patient asks you, nurse, what about this medication? And you say, gosh, that wasn't on the test. I said, is that appropriate? And then they kind of go, ah. I said a test is just a snapshot of what you know at one point in time.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. So know it all. No pressure. No pressure. There's a quote that says, research has shown that providing students of all ages with choice typically increases intrinsic motivation. And since we're talking about plagiarism, we want to increase motivation of learners. And so this is a rubric that I got this summer. And I actually think it's a pretty good rubric. It asked me to identify and describe and compare, to contrast. And you can see I wanted, just like you, I wanted the 3s. You could see I have it all underlined. I was checking my paper. They want me to analyze. But those are their objectives over there. Those are the clear objectives that they wanted us to do. But my challenge would be, is writing a paper, if we think about past experiences, if we think about if somebody's mastery experiences or past experiences were not great with this, and I will tell you that this was a paper that we got handed in class on the last day, and we had to write it during class and turn it in. I do not have great past experiences with writing on a drop of a dime. I'm a planner. I like to write it out. I like to make an outline. I like to do all of that. So this was a very stressful this was very stressful for me. So if we think about that, to me, I wanted to say what would have been some alternatives, knowing that those objectives could have stayed the same. What could have been some alternatives to this type of assignment, to where they could have known I knew what this was. Not saying that if a kid wanted to write a paper or a student wanted to write a paper, that student could write a paper. But what could be some alternatives for a student if they did not want to write a paper without doing a ton of tweaking to a rubric like this. So that's the discussion I want you to have. What would have been another alternative for something like this? So I'll give you just a little bit, and then we'll talk about it.
They always start at 3 and go down to 0.
Sorry, I didn't realize. Probably because it's been up, going, that it was dying, because we've had it running for... Well, and I didn't plug it in last night when I went home. We decorated for Christmas, so it sat in my bag. Thanks.
And then you're going to attack me better.
When you laughed, I guess, when you struck me that sentence in your paper, your laugh was classic laugh, and I didn't even get it after that. And then, phone call or text me.
No. So, ideas. You're talking about the rubric?
Yeah, I like it started at 0.
Yeah, that they get points for and not point against.
I've never seen it like that.
Really?
Movie, screen capture.
Movie?
Explain everything.
Okay. Screen capture?
Oral presentation.
Oral?
I said to have them design and conduct an experiment that they will present.
Okay. Depending on the subject.
I had the class create a hands-on study sheet or some kind of study guide for students and other groups. So they had to create some kind of flip chart or other kind of actual guide that would be kind of this is a way you can quickly go and find the information. And then gave them the charge that part of the rubric was being created in it. So like a one sheet back and forth, there was this type wasn't going to get the creative points that something else would. And so I ended up with some interesting designs as far as how people created those study guides for the other groups.
Nice. Anyone else? Based on those ideas, we came up with some. Podcast, I heard, writing a script based on a scenario, or especially like in a history class, based on this scenario, based on this time period, what kind of conversation would happen between these two. Multimedia presentations, screencast, movie, film, infographic, it's kind of what somebody was saying. Portfolio throughout, having a portfolio that showed their work throughout. A model, opposing perspective presentations, putting people on opposite side and having them take a stance. And those are just a few. You don't have to offer all of those. You can have just a few allowed choices. You can say, you may choose one of these 4 so that your rubric will fit with all of those. And you have one rubric, and then you're grading to those 4. Yeah.
Or you could say, give them the end product that you're looking for is, you need to demonstrate mastery in this subject area. You need to show me that you understand that, and let them decide how they're going to do that. And leave it wide open. A little risky maybe, but and some students, like you, would probably really struggle with that. But then again, those students that have different learning styles may gravitate to what's comfortable for them, and maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's a paper.
That goes to play with student strengths that we talked about. What strengths do I have? Am I a verbal? Am I a visual? Am I a creative? Am I a language when I write? I think variety is important.
And
If you add this element that Greg mentioned earlier, competition and public, this will be a public thing, product when you're done, that can bring up the level of quality.
well, and a lot of that we're going to talk about Thursday, how your LMS, your Canvas, can support posting some of these things, can support posting a infographic, can support posting a YouTube video, can support a lot of those. You can link right on to a discussion. You can have them, and that discussion can be open. So you could have students linking their presentation and have students commenting on each presentations. That's powerful. But also, then you have students choosing and having ownership, and then taking information that they know and then applying that information to something innovative, something that they are applying that knowledge to a situation, and decreasing the chance that they're pulling something right off of the internet to plagiarize in a paper, because they have ownership and buy-in into what they're doing, and want to hopefully match that with the relationship you're creating with them in the classroom. And we think that that's not the answer for everyone for plagiarism, but we feel like it's a piece, and it's a big piece in the way we design and the way we create that culture in the classroom. So.
One of the things I think that's nice about having kind of multiple chances to show learning is when students comment on that, or they go and look at other students, they get an opportunity to learn at various different levels. I'm a visual learner, or I'm an auditory learner, and you get ideas. So you really do get to steal ideas and learn from fellow students in your class, rather than the one option where everyone's just look at it and basically just doing it to get it done. So I think it can be an option to be able to learn from others as well, and hit all the multiple learning stuff.
I have sat in on presentations like that, though, at the end of the class, and I've heard students say orally in front of the class, make incredible statements and not support them with sources. So they still have to cite these things, even though
Absolutely.
it's a
Absolutely.
publishable public thing.
I think with a lot of these, you could have, instead of having an 8-page paper, you could have them do some type of activity like this, and back it up with a 1-page description
Sources
of how
page.
it fits the rubric criteria with the references.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you have much less writing, but it's really they're explaining how they hit those higher levels of the rubric themselves with the backing of sources.
I'll brag on one of our colleagues. Heidi's teaching a doctoral course in January, a leadership course. One of her assignments that I just looked at this morning is she created a Google Doc with, I think, 20 or 25 leadership books. And many of you have probably read some of these, but students are selecting which book that they want to read, and then they'll come back in January and have assignments and discussions based around that book that they read and learn from each other. So choice based on topics of interest and area of expertise.
Good job.
And you know the reference.
Yeah, they're there. So, looking ahead, Eric is going to come talk to you about, just briefly, about Thursday.
So how many people with the number? I think we'll probably have to do a food company that are going to come Thursday. So we're going to see if we can send this information to them so they'll come. Thank you. On Thursday, kind of like it was kind of alluded to earlier. Am I in the screen or am I too far away? Okay. Doesn't swivel far that far. We're going to go beyond just a description of how to, like how do we set up a Turnitin Dropbox or how do we check for something for plagiarism. So we're really going to be trying to look at hands-on, how can we take something that we have or an idea that we have and take some of these concepts we've been discussing and apply those and create something. So what we like people to do is if you have a device with you that you like to work on, a laptop or something, bring that with you. If not, I think we have some in this container, charging station over here that we could use. But we want to have everybody have a device so you can actually do some hands-on work. And then with you, bring an assignment that you have, a rubric that you have, or both, that you would like to take a look at with a fresh perspective. Because what we're really going to try to do is provide an opportunity to work with other people and to look at some of these concepts that we've had and try to create something different that increases student motivation, that therefore might decrease the issue of plagiarism or other things with this. Using some of these topics, what we'd like to be able to come in with one product and be able to leave with something we could try in a class that's applies some of these things we've been discussing. So if you have an assignment or you have a rubric or something you'd like to look at and get feedback on as well as kind of rework a little bit, that's great. If you don't have anything that fits that category, you can be thinking about something you might do in a class that fits this, and we're going to try to build that in. So those are what we're hoping everybody brings with them on Thursday. There will be lunch again, from what I saw. And we'll just get started, and we'll try to make this a session where you leave with something you could go try in your class the next time you teach that course and implement some of these ideas and see afterwards how it went and how you could continue to improve that through that evaluation process. So, any questions about Thursday?
Swivl again on Thursday, so if we can't come to the recording.
I think we will swivel. Yes.
Sounds like a dance.
Can I go
It
back
is.
to
Maybe we'll do that too.
conversation we had a minute ago? This is not about Thursday. But I just want to make a point. I want to plant a seed about the idea of regurgitation and application of knowledge. I think, and this is a seed that I'm preaching here and there around the valley, but we talk about project-based learning. I think oftentimes we structure our courses incorrect. We structure our courses lecture, read, quiz. Lecture, read, quiz. Throw in a nice project to make engagement happen, and then final exam. Well, the final exam is asking what? The final exam generally isn't asking application, it's asking you to come back to the base knowledge. It's testing knowledge. I think what we need to do is flip a little bit and we can do the lecture, read, quiz, or whatever, and then we do a test to figure out, do you have the knowledge? But really the final exam is the project. Can you pull all the knowledge together and reproduce as a group or as a person a project that brings together application? But I think we often take out the value of the project because it's only just for engagement and fun and not really for deep application to figure out if they actually know the information. It's just an idea that I'd like people to think about. Are we done?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.